Hello and welcome back, everyone. This is Jennifer McGuire, and I hope your day is going well. I'm back with another video showing some alcohol ink techniques. I've done many videos in the past, but today is about doing alcohol blend coloring. This is a great way to get wonderful looks from alcohol ink backgrounds that you create by combining them with stamping. I have lots of examples to share with you today. But I do want to say, if you've never seen an alcohol ink video, I encourage you to watch that first. I'll link to one here that shows the basics of creating an alcohol ink background. All of my cards start with the basic background and add stamping and coloring to it. I'm using Holtz Alcohol Inks today. I've recently changed how I store these alcohol inks. I now use the alcohol ink storage tins that Holtz came out with. In the base of the tin, I have a little circle that is printed with the color and the name of the color. I got that from the Ranger website. I printed it, laminated it, die cut it with a little circle die, and then glued it to the base of my tin so I knew where each color went in the tin, just so I could keep things organized. I also created a little swatch of each color. I put the alcohol ink on Yupo paper, let it dry, and then punched a little circle, which I glued on the top of each bottle so I could quickly see the color of each. I find this very handy, and these little tins stack up nicely in my cabinet so I can easily find what I need. Along with the alcohol inks, I'll be using Yupo paper on all of my cards today. Yupo paper is a fun synthetic paper. I chose to use the heavyweight version from Holtz, but you could use any Yupo paper you may have. You could also use glossy cardstock from Holtz for this, but I really do like that Yupo paper. So on the Yupo paper, I'm adding different colors of the alcohol inks. And I'm using an alcohol ink brush, or any kind of brush would work, to blend the colors together or move them together. And I also use a straw to blow air to force the colors to kind of move around. Now, as I mentioned, there are many ways to do alcohol ink backgrounds, so many ways, and I will link to that basic video here. Be sure to watch that. I'm not going to show all of the backgrounds that I created today because they're all created in similar ways to this one, but if you want more examples, watch that video. Okay, so once I was done with this, I let it dry. You could let it dry for 20 minutes or overnight. It really doesn't matter for this technique. You can let it sit for as long as you want. I have a bunch of alcohol ink backgrounds that I created and I just kind of have sitting where I was kind of experimenting and I never use them. And I use some of those in today's examples. So if you create a background you're not thrilled with, don't worry. You can probably do some different techniques to it to make it more appealing to you, such as today's technique. Now my head gets in the way here sometimes because I'm blowing air through a straw onto the surface to move the colors around. I find that when I blow the air through a straw, I can really control how much the color moves, and it really gives the best results. Okay, now that I have a few different backgrounds created, I noticed that I have some alcohol ink on my glass work surface. I do not want that to go to waste, so I'm taking another piece of Yupo paper and dragging it through that extra color. I'm even adding some alcohol ink blending solution, which is a clear product that allows the colors to move even more. So when I put that onto the glass, as you see me doing here, it kind of reactivates all of that color, allows it to move some more, and I can add more to my paper. So I have this soft background that I created just to prevent wasting the color on the glass. But I can use this on a future project too. Now today's video really focuses on using the Holtz Alcohol Ink Fillable pen. With this pen, you can create a custom pen with your favorite alcohol inks. You just put them inside of the pen. It has two tips. There's one that's like a bullet tip and one that's more like a brush tip. And when you color with them, it reminds me of when I color with Copic Markers. The tips are very durable. Now, I am not going to put an alcohol ink color in here. Instead, I'm going to put in alcohol ink blending solution. So you pull out the brush tip nib. You can see there's a little metal piece on it. You're supposed to use tweezers to pull it out. I just use my fingertips. And I'm going to put in a few squeezes, about 4-second squeeze of alcohol ink blending solution from Tim Holtz. Remember, this is the stuff that kind of moves our color around when we create an alcohol ink background. So I filled the barrel of the pen with that, about a 4-second squeeze. Put the tip back in, then I'm going to lay it down and roll it around a few times, just so that the solution can absorb into the 2 different tips before I try to use it. And remember, you could make your own pens by putting color in here if you wanted to. But for today's technique, I want that alcohol blending solution so I can lift color away or move it away. So let's do the first example. I have one of the alcohol ink backgrounds that I created before. I trimmed it down and I'm saving those extra pieces. This is trimmed down to about 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I then have the pretty pink Posh Autumn Wreath stamp set. I really am a big fan of this set. I like the style of the wreath, and I like that there are fall elements in the wreath. However, I also like that a little flower is included in case you want to stamp that, cut it out, and cover up the acorns in the wreath, so you can make it a spring or summer wreath. I really like stamp sets that give you a few options. I'm just going to use the wreath as is, along with the greeting in the center. I'm putting my alcohol ink piece into my MISTI stamping tool. You don't need to use a stamping tool for this, but I found it to be very helpful. I've placed the wreath and the greeting into the stamping tool, and now I'm going to use an anti-static powder tool over my alcohol ink surface. Alcohol inks sometimes are a little sticky, so you want to make sure you use the anti-static powder tool generously so that when we heat emboss, we get a clear image. So I'm inking up my stamps with VersaMark ink. This is just a clear sticky ink, and I'll stamp this onto my background. I'll then add some white fine embossing powder or white detailed embossing powder. Any embossing powder would work here. Because I use the anti-static powder tool, the embossing powder will only stick to the places that we stamped with VersaMark. Now, when heat embossing on Yupo paper, be sure to allow your heat gun to warm up for a long time before bringing it to your paper, and keep the heat moving because you don't want to warp the Yupo paper, but it is definitely possible to heat emboss on Yupo paper, as I did it on all of my examples today. So now I'm taking the brush tip of my blending pen and I am coloring in my image. But when I color it in, I'm actually removing or kind of moving the color and transferring it to a piece of scrap paper. What's left behind is a very muted look when I color in these images, and it removes the shine that you get with the alcohol ink on the Yupo paper that's around the image. At this point, I realized I was wasting all that color I was lifting away. Why not put it onto another card? So I used platinum embossing powder and heat embossed the same image on white cardstock, just plain old white cardstock. And I'm taking the color that I lift off my alcohol ink background and placing it onto that white background, just coloring in the images. And it gives a nice color transfer. And when you move this color, it feels like you're coloring with Copic markers because you're able to blend them very easily. If you find that there is too much of a certain color on the tip of your pen, you can just scribble it off onto the scrap paper to remove it. If you don't have a pen like the one that I'm using today, you could instead put some alcohol ink blending solution onto your work surface and pick it up with a fine brush or a tiny little tool to do this technique. I used to use Microbrushes for my adhesive. I couldn't find any in my stash to show you, but I'll link to them below. Those would be good for this technique too. Another thing that you can do is with those scraps, those leftover pieces of alcohol ink background, you can pick up color and color with it onto any image that you may want. So here I'm picking up some of that vibrant red and adding it to some of the berries. So you could just use this for basic color blending. Now here's another background where I heat emboss the same image and I'm doing the same technique. This time I'm picking up some blues and greens from that background. And you can see I'm adding that to our example over on the right. And I can really easily blend these colors together with this marker. And I find these tips hold up very nicely, even though I use them for a ton of examples today on top of the heat embossed surfaces. Now this card on the left, you won't see a final card example today because I spilled coffee on it, but I did want to show you how the technique worked with those colors. Now here's another example that I did. And I noticed that when I did my technique of using the alcohol blending pen to lift off the color, my white embossing powder didn't stay crisp and white. So I decided to go and heat emboss with white once again, right on top of the image I did before. So here I stamped with VersaMark ink, adding white embossing powder, and I'll heat set that, and that makes my outline nice and bright white once again. So let's look at the examples that were created so far. Here you can see the muted color on the inside of the images because we lifted it away with that blending solution in the pen, and the bold color around the images. I like how it's reversed from what we normally do. Now you may notice that all of the envelopes in today's video have a kindness matters sentiment on it. Wanted to show you real quick. That's from this Pretty Pink Posh Kind Simple Sayings stamp set. I really like the sentiments in here and that it's small, so the price point is excellent. Here's the other example that I created. I added a For You die cut sentiment in the center and also some pearls scattered along the wreath. I like the bold fall colors in the background here. And again, there you have the Kindness Matters sentiment on the envelope. The For You is from this Pretty Pink Posh Thankful for You die. I just used the words for and you, die cut 3 of each with white cardstock, glued them together for a stacked look, and added them to the center of the wreath. You could do 1 layer of die cut if you want to, but by stacking 3 together, it stands out even more. Then we have our bonus card. This is the one where I placed all that ink that we lifted with the alcohol ink pen and placed onto this card. So again, I had heat embossed that with platinum embossing powder and used our excess alcohol ink to color in the flowers. So that's a great way to make multiple cards at once. So if you have any extra alcohol ink backgrounds that you're not using, you can use that color with the pen to color in another card that you may have. This next card features this new Pretty Pink Posh stamp set. I white heat embossed the cluster of flowers onto an alcohol ink background that I created on Yupo paper, just like I showed you earlier. I also heat embossed this same image on plain white cardstock with silver embossing powder, and those are the 2 pieces you see here. I have my alcohol ink blending pen filled with the alcohol ink blending solution, just like I had before. I haven't refilled it at all. And I am removing color from the colorful piece and adding it to the white piece. So you could just scribble it off onto scrap paper, but you might as well put that extra color to good use. After I've removed all of the color from those flowers on the blue background, I decided to heat emboss some leaves on that card too. But I wanted to add some green color into those leaves. So this extra alcohol ink background over on the right that I spilled coffee on, I'm grabbing some of the green ink off of that and moving it over onto my blue background using that same alcohol ink blending pen. Now I know people are going to ask if you can use Copic markers for this, and I wanted to show you that you can here. However, I don't recommend it. Copics are very expensive, and I don't feel like they should be used for this. I'm not sure if it would do any damage. Sometimes embossing powder leaves marks on the tips, so I wouldn't recommend doing it, although as you can see, it is possible to do. Okay, so I added a thankful die cut sentiment to this. I cut it from that Thankful for You die cut that I showed you earlier. And I stacked 3 white die cuts together and then a gold mirror die cut on the top for lots of shine. Then I stamped For You from the Simon Says Stamp Tiny Words stamp set onto a thin strip of white cardstock and glued that on also. So you can see that blue color that we lifted from the flowers, the green that we added in, and that bold color around it all. Now I'm going to continue on with more examples, and I wanted to mention I didn't have to refill my pen at all with the blending solution. A little goes a long way, and that pen holds up nicely. So here's another example. This one features the Simon Says Stamp Altenew Dainty Sprig combo. Now this stamp set is exclusive to Simon Says Stamp and it's limited edition. And I thought the sentiments were beautiful. So I white heat embossed them onto a background that I created with alcohol inks on Yupo paper, just like the other cards. I also heat embossed the same images on white cardstock with black embossing powder. I lifted the color from the alcohol inked background and transferred it over to the white cardstock background. With this example, you can see a rainbow of color that we end up with on both pieces. On this example, you can really see the shine that the alcohol ink has on the outside, but inside of those images, you get a very matte finish. Here's the extra card that I made with the excess ink on white cardstock. Now both of these I trimmed down and put onto a card along with a Simon Says Stamp Marilyn die cut. I wanted a tone-on-tone look, so on one card I used white on white, on the other I used black on white. You can see I've used my alcohol ink pen on lots of cards with lots of different colors. You can easily scribble the color off the tip before going to a new one. Okay, here is a Christmas card for you using a new product from Tim Holtz and Simon Says Stamp. This is the STAMPtember 2018 stamp set. It's exclusive to Simon Says Stamp and it's limited edition. So there's this stamp set and also a few stencils. So there are these 4 layering stencils. I wanted to show you quickly how to use these before we jump into the card, just in case you're wondering. These stencils are super cool. You can actually use them twice, shifting them slightly between to create a pattern. If you look closely at the stencil, you'll see, it's hard to see here, there's trees etched into the stencil. You look through those little etchings and line it up with the stenciling you've already done, then ink up with another color to create a fun pattern. So check out that fun background. Wanted to show you that because there's also a star stencil that works just the same way. I think that's really cool, and they are sold with that stamp set. So I have an alcohol inked background that I created on Yupo paper. I added my anti-static powder tool, and I'm stamping this with VersaMark ink and adding white detail embossing powder. I'm also stamping the same image with VersaFine black ink onto regular white cardstock and adding clear embossing powder. So I have 2 images so that I can work together and create 2 cards at once. Again, I'm using that same alcohol ink pen, lifting color from the green alcohol inked background and adding it onto the white cardstock background. So you can see how easy it is to lift the colorway, and if I feel like I've lifted too much off that I don't want to transfer over to my white cardstock, I can scribble it onto scrap paper. I'll be honest, you'll get more color off the alcohol inked background than you'll need to fill in your image on your white cardstock. Now you can see that kind of all blended together when I did this over my white embossed image. So I'm going back and white heat embossing again right on top just to make the outline more crisp. After doing the coloring on top of this piece, you may notice that that embossing becomes dull. All you have to do is reheat it with your heat gun and it'll become shiny again. Now for the sentiment, I wanted peace and joy, but not the rest of the sentiment. I'm notorious for cutting my stamps so that I can get new looks. It doesn't harm them as long as you cut between the image lines. So I have peace and joy in my MISTI stamping tool. I stamped onto vellum with VersaMark ink, and then I'm adding gold heat embossing. This gives a beautiful gold shine that I can have over top of my image on my card. I trimmed my heat embossed sentiment into a strip that I can wrap around my alcohol inked piece when I assemble my card. Next, I'm going to create a note card background using the stripe stencil that's included with that STAMPtember Tim Holtz stamp set. I placed the stencil down, applied Mowed Lawn Distress Oxide ink, then I shifted it to line up those etched lines that you can barely see there with the lines I've already inked, and then I applied Lucky Clover Distress Oxide ink. So I end up with these perfect stripes going down the center of my note card. I like that subtle bit of interest for the background of a card. Okay, so the two cards I created using this technique, we have a square 4 1/4 by 4 1/4 inch white note card. I just trimmed down my sentiment strip so it said piece only, wrapped it around my alcohol ink piece, and added it to the card base with foam tape. Now for the other panel, I trimmed that down, wrapped the Peace and Joy sentiment strip around it, and added it to our striped note card base. Now that Peace and Joy covers a lot of our image that we have there in the center, so I might go back and trim it down so it just says peace, so more of the image can show. But this shows you again how you can get two cards from one technique. Okay, now I have just one more pair of cards for you, and this technique is my favorite. It's a little bit different than the other, and I really like the results. So the products I used on these cards are from the new Simon Says Stamp Sketched Flowers Kit. Now, I only seem to be drawn to certain card kits, ones that really give a great value, and this one definitely does. It has an alcohol ink lift ink pad. It has 3 colors of alcohol ink in it. It has a large stamp set, which I'm about to use, some cardstock, and also some foiling supplies. Those 3 cards over on the left, they're pre-printed cards, or card fronts, that are ready to foil. All you have to do is take the foil in the kit, lay it on top of that piece, run it through a laminator, and you have a beautiful foiled card. There's a lot in this kit, that's why I wanted to show it to you. And I'll be using the stamp set, the alcohol lift ink, and the alcohol inks. However, you can buy all of these supplies separately. I will link to them all below if you want to check them out. Okay, so I started by taking Yupo paper, adding those 3 colors of alcohol inks to it and letting it dry, and that's the piece that you see here. Now this time, I'm going to stamp on this with the alcohol lift ink pad. That's that ink pad that I just showed you in the kit. However, you can buy it separately. If you don't know about alcohol lift ink, I'll link to a video here showing all kinds of techniques using it. But basically, when you stamp onto an alcohol inked background with the alcohol lift ink, it removes the color where you stamped. All you have to do is dab off the extra ink with a dry cloth, and check it out, you get this ghost-like image. So this time I'm going to color in that ghost-like image with that alcohol ink pen. It's the same one I've used throughout the whole video. And I'll remove the color and transfer it onto that extra white cardstock piece with the stamped image that you see there at the top. So before I was coloring in a white heat embossed image, this time I'm just coloring in that ghost-like image that I got from the alcohol lift ink. I actually like the results of this better than the examples I showed you earlier, but I know not everybody has the alcohol lift ink, so I wanted to show both. Once I've colored in that entire image with my alcohol ink blending pen, I'm stamping again right on top of the first image with VersaMark ink, and this time I'm white heat embossing it. And this will give a nice crisp white outline to that coloring that we did, or the removal of color that we did. So I trimmed that panel down, added it to a white note card. Also added a thankful die cut from that Thankful for You die I showed you earlier. And a You Are So Kind sentiment strip from the Tiny Words stamp set from Simon Says Stamp. You can see that bold color that's around our image and how we were able to remove the color using that blending solution in that alcohol ink blending pen. Now I removed all that color and transferred it onto this piece. That's just regular white cardstock with a black heat embossed image. I used a Thanks die cut. This is actually a Thanks leaf shaker die. So it cuts this little shaker window, but I cut the leaf shaker part off, so I just had the word thanks, and it fit nicely into this card space. Okay, so there's ways to use the Tim Holtz alcohol blending pen, fill it with alcohol blending solution to remove and transfer color. If you do not have this pen, remember, you could instead paint with a really fine paintbrush your alcohol blending solution, but this pen sure is handy to have. Holds up nicely and you can use it for many cards. Okay, I hope this was helpful to you on more ways to use your alcohol inks. I link all the supplies that I used down in my YouTube description below. I also have a couple more videos in the middle, alcohol ink videos that you might like. I appreciate all the time that you spend with me here crafting. I hope this was helpful, and we'll see you again soon.